So, hi to everybody. This is Stefano, Mazzarino Geopolitics from Italy. Today we have like a new panel with a lot of, let's say, new and old people, old like friends of my channel. So we have like Philip Langley from Australia, Eknat Namdistori, from Denmark, and Cheng Wei Lai from Taiwan, that is new. So I invited him to join us for this roundtable at the beginning, and maybe we will have like a complete speech with him about Taiwan, about what is happening and whatever. It's very interesting for me to have Chang and Philip in the same panel because it's let's say a strange moment for the European geopolitics now about war in Ukraine, but it's very interesting of what will be in the Pacific with the Quad, and Australia have a big part on it. Today it's an interesting other day also about economy and geopolitics, because there was signed a free trade agreement between European Union and New Zealand. Someone is not talking about it, but it's very interesting because it's a small news, but it seems that changed something, because with this free trade agreement, there is for the European Union company there is savings for 200 millions of tolls and import, and for the New Zealand it's let's say interesting chance to export agricultural commodities to Europe. So something is changing rapidly, and I think that we could make a new, let's say, viewpoint of what is happening. War, geopolitics, economics. I have some new data, but it's like interesting from also Russia, Europe. We have also Anatoly Karlin that is coming from Russia. So the panel of today, it's very interesting. Anatoly has like a website, already linked him in the description. Philip, I have only the LinkedIn. Cheng Wei have like Twitter, YouTube, whatever, and Ekner, I just put like the new TikTok channel and the YouTube channel. So let's start to talk about it. If anybody wants to have any information about the single speaker, you can go down and click on the link, subscribe to the channel. And if you have any type of question, just put it in the chat and I will put to the speaker. If we can start, let's say, Philip, let's start with you, and then we will go to Cheng, and we will do like the round table. What is some news from Australia? What is happening? Quad, China? Anything that you can tell about it?
Definitely. Well, look, it's great to be back on this fantastic channel, and I love these roundtable sessions. There's always so much great information and fantastic speakers. So from Australia's perspective, over the last couple of months, we obviously have our new federal government. So they've found their feet. They're obviously the Labor government under Anthony Albanese, who's our current Prime Minister. In terms of its, I guess, connection with, say, the Ukraine, I think Australia is pretty much following what we've been doing previous to like the former administration. So basically falling in line behind the United States, providing some token assistance. But it's unfortunate, I think, that the current government is doing a lot of policy by PR rather than having a long-term strategic view. And for Australia, that's absolutely critical, because for us as a country, we're actually at a real turning point, because we've got really important relations with China. We've got really important relations with Taiwan. They're important trading partners. And then we've also got a very complicated situation in Russia, which, even though Australia is very far away from Russia, we keep getting pulled in time and time again. And to be honest with you, I just don't think the experts in Australia are really quite up to it. We have some good people, but massively under-resourced. And Stefano, you mentioned the free trade agreement with New Zealand. So that's actually really interesting. I think you're right. It did go underreported. But again, I guess from my perspective, I'd see this as part of the European Union actually taking a longer term view and wanting to sort of pivot slowly towards Asia. And if you're doing that, the easiest way to do that is Australia and New Zealand. It's such a soft landing ground. Different countries do it, and a lot of companies do it as well. So Australia is sometimes known as the gateway to Asia. So in a nutshell, that sort of is, I guess, at a high level, but happy to delve deeper into any of those things, Stefano.
So, another interesting thing that I wanted to ask, because I have like some interesting economical data that is coming like officially from Bank of Russia, from US, from OECD. It's very interesting for me about the situation of the different interpretation. Maybe Anatoly can tell this position about it, about the Russian central bank of the value of rubles, because at the beginning we saw that the ruble reached like a very good exchange next to 50 in exchange to euro and to dollar, but now with euro it's over 100. And I read like the official statement of Nabulina of Russian central bank, and 1 year ago she said that the Russian economy was doing good, that it was like the symptom of the ruble that was a strong value and it was okay. And now it is like less than half of the value of 1 year ago. The interpretation is the value of the ruble now is still good because it's good for our export and blah blah blah. So I don't understand really the Russian approach of the, let's say, Russian central bank about the interpretation of the value of a currency, because normally I think basic economicals skills said that the value of a currency is connected to the strength of the economy. And so, Anatoly, what you can say to us about what do you think the Russian central bank it's like interpreting this situation of the ruble and like the internal Russian economy?
I haven't been following this super closely, but what I think seems to have been the case is that they loosened far too rapidly. So the gap between the Russian central bank states and the Fed rates is the lowest it has been for like a couple of decades right now, I think. And this sort of like it is no longer sufficient basically to compensate for the level of risk that people are taking. So you had some like accelerating capital outflows. So rates are probably going to go back up after this, or going to be held at the 10-year rate. That's basically my interpretation. And obviously, with the whole risk perception thing, the Wagner mutiny must have played a significant part in that.
So, because I have also other data that I will want to show you, I want to show you next about interpretation, like of only of data, not about like rumors or whatever. It's very interesting for me about what is happening in the export of commodities. Maybe we can talk a little bit about with the Damn History that is like specialized more in economics and geopolitics. The official data said that, for example, the gas export, the pipeline gas export of Russia obviously is collapsed next to zero. Because 80% of the gas export by pipeline was going to Europe, and there is no real pipeline to East, except like this phantomatic power of Siberia 2, that it seems to me like the rumors it's not going to, let's say, be ready soon. And the most interesting thing about the profit of these oil and gas industries, that we have to remember that it's 60% of the Russian GDP, is, let's say, going in the same quantity of before the war, but with a strong decrease of profit. And it's the reason from the data seem obviously, but not for the technical people, let's say not technical people around, is that the export seems to be mainly crude materials, not refined. And the India and China don't want to import refined oil, but they want to refine on site. And this situation is problematic for the Russian industry because the most part of the profit was on refined. So you are exporting the same quantity of materials, but with, I don't know, 70% or 60% less profit than before. So how much, Ekner, in your opinion, can list this situation that war is very expensive? It's a situation of, let's say, stalemate or not clear at the moment. The money in the national budget, it's much less than 1 year and a half ago. What is your opinion about it?
First of all, I just put my mic down. Can you guys hear me fine? Just made sure because I just did a tune. Perfect. Let me do a quick introduction since we haven't spoken since last year, since I last came on this podcast. I'm Ekner. I'm actually from the United States. I'm half Danish and I currently live in Copenhagen. I am a historian and I've been traveling to Asia front and back. And now I'm actually going to be going there to Japan and teaching there in terms of history. On the side, I do geopolitics and I have a channel on Telegram, and I will slowly start to be back on TikTok and YouTube. Now to get to this large question about commodities, Russian refined oil and natural gas. So Europe, I didn't check out the latest statistics. I didn't know that it went down to zero, but we do know that the largest one was the Nord Stream pipeline, which blew up, and we had a whole thing that we spoke about last time on that subject. We won't go into who did it right now, but there are still other operational pipelines, and they go through Belarus and Ukraine, and they're still functional. They're the ones that are going to Romania, Hungary, and also all the way to Italy and Germany as well. But yes, like you say, it's more limited and less, but it's still functional.
Ekner,
yeah.
only if I can make the point to your speech. Actually, Italy, that was dependent 40% by Russian gas. 40%, it's a big number. It's to zero. Now we are
It didn't go to zero.
We are
so we've already hit
zero. That. So, the actual quantity of gas from Russia that was going through Ukraine, Slovakia, and Austria in a town that it's called Tarvisio, and the border from Russia to, let's say, between Russia and Italy, there was this free country, Ukraine, Slovakia, Austria. Now it's zero, and you have to think about it, but because it's the most part of a gas import for industries in European Union was Germany and Italy. Germany was dependent 60%, Italy was dependent 40%. Why? Because there was strict connection between Germany and Italy and Russia. Like we were, let's say, best friends in these things. And imagine that also the price was not the market price. This is something that it's not really public. But for example, the Italian, let's say, hydrocarbon company that is called Eni had an agreement that started after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and the prices were made in a direct agreement between Rosneft or Gazprom and Eni. It was not on market. Actually, we are not importing anymore from Russia, and the quantity I can show you that it's coming in Europe.
But is that like fully that is not operational, or is it just for this period as of this moment, and it could be operational by the next?
No, it can be reactivated anytime. But at the moment, like the import from Tarvisio, it's zero, because at the beginning we started to cut from Russia a little bit, and then Italy had let's say 3-4 operational GNL points in Italy. Now we have like 6 or 7, also with mobile, plus with TAP from Azerbaijan. The situation it's starting to moving that like the provision. Let's say that the incoming point of the gas was, let's say, the north. So Germany with Nord Stream. Now it's going from the south. So it's like Algeria, Azerbaijan, and the other interesting point, it's called...
So the wheel is in motion, and we're already trying to outsource of where we're getting our source of energy from. doesn't mean that we fully stopped getting everything from Russia. It could be
No,
at the
no,
moment,
no. Like,
but
let's
it
say,
is true that it is coming from Azerbaijan, and we're making new routes and new roads and movements that are going into them.
it was already made. Let's say this pipeline was made after the dissolution of the Soviet Union, and it was it's called TAP. It's going Baku through Georgia to Turkey to Greece to Albany and to southern Italy. This is operational from the last 3 years, and it's like now it's full operational, gas and oil, and there is another one that it's in discussion, like coming from the biggest let's say gas field that was discovered in the Mediterranean. Nobody's talking a lot about it, but it's very interesting. That it's called EastMed. It's south of Cyprus, and if you check, let's say, it's very strange for me in geopolitics, but we can talk about it later. A lot of actors all around Cyprus that normally it's like in war. Let's say Egypt, Israel, Lebanon, whatever. They're all agreeing in like the use of the resources, and not anymore to make the pipeline because it's very not flexible, but to export to LNG, but it's easier because you're not exporting from Bahrain. It's an internal LNG in the Mediterranean. And so you can move, like you're not fixed to export to Italy. There is a problem with Italy, I cannot sell. You can sell everywhere. So, returning to the point. So you were saying, but I will cut myself. Actually, like the European policy, it's like to permit to the countries without a sea access to import from Russia, to don't have problem of like, let's say, taking gas without LNG. Let's say Hungary, you don't have sea access, so they are allowed to import oil and gas. Slovakia is the same. But for the rest, we are making like the inversion, because before we were like buying gas, now Italy is exporting gas to others. So this is what I see that it's changing. Like from east to west, now it's coming from south to north in Europe, like the commodities. So, Ekner, if you want to continue, I will not interrupt.
I want to, now that you mentioned all that, and thanks for the clarification with instead of from east to west, now south to north seems to be the main push. What was your question that you would like me to answer, so I know where which direction I'm supposed to go on?
My question is, it's like how last can be this situation about like the Russian economy that is like declaring to the world that it's nothing, it's happening, but let's say, I don't want to explain how I know it, but let's say that I have data from this week about the actual prices in, let's say, 3 regions in Russia, not like from the Russian central bank. The inflation is real, it's very high. Let's say, stupid thing, one piece of hummus, let's say, from a supermarket, that in Lidl in Italy costs 90 cents, in Russia it's $4.
I have something to say about this. Okay. So where Russian oil, let's say natural gas, it was always the largest buyer was always Europe. That's been cut off since the war in Ukraine. Now it's moving its way onto India and China as its largest supplier, or its largest buyer, I meant to say. Now, which pipes are actually the ones that are going toward China? They're from the Siberian region, and there's only one main line that's very functional, but it's at capacity. And there's something very interesting that when this war started, when the West started to do its sanctions, Russia has not produced, and I say produced, but I mean actually trained new units to work on these pipelines since the 80s. Those have always come from the West after the Gorbachev. So now we're at this situation, listen to this, where the Russians are actually lacking manpower, trained manpower that came from the West, because they all left during the start of the war. So something that I don't know, the question is, I don't know when this will all burst in the air. But the answer but we know that it will happen because in permafrost, you can't really come in there. There's a large thing where like the ice, and when it melts, it doesn't sink down. It comes up and makes floods. And the only people that have the tech is Western tech, and we're not giving it back to Russia. So if there comes a time when it comes finally time to maintenance, the Russians will have something on their hands, and that's where it all goes up into flames. But until then, they can still keep producing, and of course, as you say, the inflation and the price of things will keep getting higher and more expensive. But the Russian population will just have to sit down there and deal with it as long as this war continues, because the government will not budge as long as they decide they won't allow it to budge. That goes into possibly a new subject, which I won't get into now because I still want to do this roundtable. But I think I'll end there. That the main point I'm trying to say is that they're missing a lot of Western tech and the Western trained employees to work on this maintenance. And because of that will burst.
Let me give you one provocation, and then I will pass to Taiwan. So the provocation is, I have a lot of, let's say, connection, friends, whatever, in Russia, and especially people that is working like in oil and gas sector. Let's say this, I will not be precise, but I have friends in Rosneft, Gazprom, whatever. Mm-hmm. Rosneft, let's start with Rosneft. The problem that you said, it's very interesting because I know people that it's like working in perforation and in searching new oil fields in Russia. Let's say Central Russia, not Siberia, but also Siberia. So the problem is that when the war started, they started to reduce the extraction immediately 50% less, like to increase the price. Okay. Second thing, as you said, the most part of the people that is working as physician or geologist or whatever was like trained in international companies, not only Western, but especially in USA. It's very interesting because the most part of the technology in perforation, it's, let's say, Texas or whatever, but it's connected to British or German or the US companies. So the problem is like the lack of the manpower. It's not only from the Western technology, but also because a lot of the people that were highly qualified, engineers, IT or whatever, left. So it's the same situation that I found when I was in Colombia, let's say a few months ago, and I was asking the situation about oil, let's say oil industry in Venezuela. Venezuela could be the richest country in the world, very low population, very, let's say, international country because there is a lot of Italians, for example, from the 50s. It was like Saudi Arabia of South America. With Chavez and Maduro, they started to reconvert the oil industries and make it like a state company. And let's say 90% of the personnel went abroad, and they converted the personnel with military people. Now the oil fields are like extracting 10% of capacity than before. So it's correct. And another interesting thing that I want to make this provocation for later, it's about not how much you sell, but how much you earn about it. You get in money, because it was like, let's say, the accountant, let's say, revenue of Venezuela, it was, I don't know, from 17 billions of export, they got only 4 billion. So the other billion were like between brokers, like black market. The oil was delivered but not paid. So it's something that, this is why I'm thinking how much the economy can fake this data. Because you can say, I sold to India, China, and Pakistan and Egypt. Let's check to the state of economy of Pakistan and Egypt. Something that is a little bit like boiler room internally. So I don't know. This is why I'm still thinking that economically, this step was very stupid, because you exchange one very, very affordable, rich client that pay you weekly, with countries that first, let's say that the trade behavior of China. I have nothing against China, Cheng, but it's much different from like Europeans, because it's a little bit, let's say, it's like Visa or it's like Visa. It's not like we can make a deal. And now you cannot make a deal because they are the only buyers. So, Cheng, it's the first time in our channel. So, if you, Philip, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, look, I was just gonna jump on in really quickly and just build on what Ekna was saying, and just add like a little Australian dimension. So one of the things that we've found in the Australian economy and Australian foreign policy is when you've got all of this disruption in natural resources from the war in the Ukraine and Russia, what we've actually seen is an increased demand for Australian resources. And what's been interesting to see, basically a war that sort of is, there are a lot of Australians who unfortunately don't see just how big an impact it is. But economically, the opportunities for Australia and Australian companies has actually been increasing because of the growing demand. So there's just an interesting little Australian angle there for you, which I just thought, as an Australian, I'll throw in there. And if there are any Australians listening, it's a good little angle to sort of say, hey, you know what, this is actually so important for our economy, for our own geopolitics, and for our foreign policy. So I just wanted to add that little nugget there if I could.
Okay, thank you. Cheng, if you want to say a little bit your position about what is happening, and also like the mood that is in Taiwan, if you can explain to us, because the information about Taiwan is still in Europe, there is very, very few information. And for sure, Philip has a lot more because in Australia we're next to. But if you can explain to us the actual situation, what is the mood, the politics, how do you feel the presence of the US, the other countries all around you, Japan, Australia, Thailand, and for sure China? Cheng, we cannot hear you. Let me try to habilitate your mic. No. So, Cheng, because before you were working, so try to go out and return back. Exit and return. Try. Okay, perfect. So we will wait him. So Anatoly, let's, because you didn't talk before, waiting Cheng. So let's pass fastly. Okay, Cheng, let's see if it's working.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Okay, we can hear you now. So
okay, good. Okay, thanks. And I would like to reintroduce the situation in China, because this year is kindly very really different to the past year. During the past year when we are in the UK, because there are some China YouTubers. There are some China YouTubers that have to publish some videos on the internet, and like Taiwanese viewers will leave some comment. And recently, before 2021, when we Taiwanese leave the comment on the China's YouTubers, they are always say, "Oh, the China will be united by us." Okay, go through. Be ready for Great China or something. They support the unification of the China now. But now this after October 2022, the shutdown policy of the China failed. And it seems that a really large proportion of people get awake and they find the China government is relying to them. So this year, when people talk about invading Taiwan or reuniting the Great China problem, you can see the comment is always, "Oh, please leave Taiwan out of the communism." The communism has tortured Chinese people for a long time. Please leave Taiwan free. Or something this comment. So the recent comment that the domestic situation is extremely unstable. instead of due to both the first time is shutdown policies failed. The second time is that the economic situation in China is really worse, and it gets worse and worse this year. The first thing is that the China has a really big bubble economy in the 2019 because that the China has the currency control. They are not allowed people to exchange their renminbi, their currency, very easily. So this have a one impact. This can let the Chinese government to cheat on the economic data. So before the 2020, the number of the China, the economy number like a GDP growth or something else, this kind of number is very beautiful in the recent China. But after 2022, the domestic situation is really deteriorates. It deteriorates a lot, so that this kind of cheating means doesn't work, and the side effect is getting more and more apparent. So now this year, what we see about China is that the China's growing economy, the economy has collapsed, and many people became to anti-government, and we see a lot more and more people are use VPN to get into Twitter in order to curse the Communist Party. Yeah, and currently in Taiwan, because we have an election next year by the January 2024. So inside the Taiwan internet, we didn't care much about China. We didn't care much about Ukraine. We only care about us. Recently, we are talking about who will be the candidate. There are two candidates. Well, one is called Lai Ching-te. Lai Ching-te is the pro-U.S. Politician, and another called Hou You-yi, or you can say his name Hou. Hou is the pro-China candidate. So these two persons will compete with each other, and currently now it's very hard to say who will win the election, because although that in Taiwan we have a rule. If you a party has reigned for 8 hours, 8 years, the next election we will tend to let another party to go to control of the government. So this is the consensus since 2020. So this year, 2024, is supposed to be the pro-China party, 国民党, to be in hand, and many of the election results shows that. But the problem is that because China has declared have some very bad act on us, because like last year when Pelosi came to Taiwan, China used some airplane to fly over Taiwan, and so the people piece of China really much. So the larger people doesn't want the Taiwan to get back to be pro-China again. So the supporting run of the pro-China party is not very apparent currently. So this is this year what we are thinking. And about the Taiwanese economy, we are going great. Although now we consider now our economy is not good, but we saw that by next year there will be a huge demand on the semiconductor and like the television, like panels and something else. So we expected this year our economy will not be good, but next year our economy will be good. So we are really optimistic about our future. Yeah.
Cheng, like question, do you think that because the approach of China, it's very difficult to understand, like from the Western point, especially like to, in my vision, it seems, and we will talk about with the other speakers, because if let's say a weak Russia, it's not good for anybody. let's say, especially because it's a country with 30% of the discovered, let's say, resources in the world, with only 3% of the population. And down, let's say, south of Russia, you have like India and China, and let's say put also Pakistan. Let's say over 3 billion people, that it's like on the southern border. And it's very curious for me, for example, that now in China they are talking about Vladivostok with all the Chinese names, like something that was, I don't know, impossible, I think, 2 years ago. Or another thing, it's like, could this situation be good for China and not for Russia? Because let's say China can be a master of Russia, and Russia could be a vassal of China. Not anymore. India. It's very interesting for me to ask to Philip, because India, let's say China, it's a difficult position for me, but India, it's also very mysterious position, because technically it's like with Quad, like, but historically it's there is a little bit of hate love with Russia, and so I don't understand if could be like containment with the other Quad or no. So the question is for the panel, what is your like idea of what is doing China, especially with this iron alliance with Russia? Is it true, or is, let's say, a way to, let's say, take as much as possible as the situation of weakness of Russian Federation during the war, and get everything that they can in the field of resources and dependency from technology? Because Russian technology, I mean, it's not so great. Like, if you can tell me one name of one product that it's exported in the world, except oil and gas and vodka, I don't know. So if Russia would be dependent from Western technology on or after from Chinese technology, it's very dependent also by the Taiwan situation, because, as you said, semiconductor industries worldwide is dependent by Taiwan, and probably also the redesigning of the US industries to bring back a little bit of Taiwanese companies in US soil on other countries can affect also your economy. So if like when you can do a roundtable about it, about Russia, China, blah blah. Philip?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to quickly jump in. So look, what came to my mind as you were speaking were the words of Henry Kissinger in his book on China, which has dated a little bit, but if you haven't read it, I would recommend you have a look. And he talks about the table, and with it being Russia, China, and the United States. And he said the corner always won. And by the corner, he meant either Russia and China, or China and the United States, and whoever the two teamed up against the one, then the two would always win, right? And right now, the corner is China and Russia, right? So as an Australian, I look at that and I'm pretty nervous. I'm nervous because I see China with Vladivostok, which is, actually pretty close to Australia, very, very relevant for us. I see them getting a huge amount of resources pretty cheaply, to be honest with you. I see them getting a lot of military technology pretty cheaply. Military technology, which then the Chinese don't have any problem with copyright or IP, and they just take it and they improve upon it. And for us, when we look at the South China Sea, that's a very clear threat for us. And again, I think Australian foreign policy people, they just don't, this hasn't clicked, right? They focus on China, but they don't focus on, what's happening in China's backyard, this iron alliance, right? It is iron, but I think the iron for Russia is sort of like sort of a prison, because they don't have any choice. In terms of India, I think that's a really great, it is a bit mysterious even for Australians, but we're all part of the Commonwealth, which is basically means we all play cricket, right? And that is a stronger bond. That's a great sport, is a stronger bond than any alliance. And so in many senses, Australia and India actually have a really good alliance and relationship, and that relationship is getting deeper. So there is a sense in which Australia is trying to find, I guess, a bit of an angle, or trying to, find a way around China, or to at least balance some of the the imbalance that exists in the Asia Pacific. But I think Cheng Wei will have a lot to add there. What do you think?
Okay. Personally, first I want to expand about China-Russia reaction and their point of view on this war. Exactly because now, as I said, the economy is collapsed this year, so that they seek every chance to try to hold on their economy. The Vladivostok, the harbor of the Vladivostok, or we call in 中文 called 海参崴. This kind of port is used to develop the northeast area of the China, because northeast area of the China, the traffic is not very convenient, so they need the Vladivostok port to use the sea use the sea transportation from Dalian. Dalian is is a main port on the northeast area from Dalian to Vladivostok, and use the Vladivostok to transport the good to the margin, to the border of the northeast area. This is the main reason why why China will ask Russia to land the Vladivostok. And this is something that only after war China can happy, because China had planned it for a long time, but before the war there's no chance for Putin to agree with this policy. But so now they make this policy country, and they are actually very happy. And this kind of Vladivostok harbor can definitely boost the economy of the northeast area of the China. This is true, and I guess that China will have import more natural gas by LNG, and use the Vladivostok harbor to export the gas to China. Yeah, this is true, because now on the rule on the laws, basically on the Vladivostok is considered as the domestic harbor in China. So the gas in that port won't be taxed much by the Chinese government. So that will make the natural gas fees more inexpensive in China, and this is what the Chinese people and the Chinese government need. They need some way to try to save their economy, though this is true. But the next thing is about the situation. How does the China support Russia? The problem is that there's no consensus inside in the domestic China they want to help Russia or not, because that there are two sides inside China: the pro-Ukrainian side and the pro-Russia side. The pro-Ukrainian side inside China is their military, their army, their military and enterprise is all they are all pro-Ukrainian. Why? Because that after the Soviet collapse, Ukraine has sold many military skill, technology, and equipment, even the aircraft carrier to China. So and Ukraine has sent many experts to China for the military cooperation. So that is something that the Chinese PLA army and the military enterprise they are very grateful to Ukraine. So they definitely want to help Ukraine to win this war. But on the other side, about the governments, about the propaganda system. Those propaganda systems are learned by Russia. China had used the same way as the Soviet-style propaganda. So the collaboration on the Chinese government on the propaganda system, they have high collaboration to Russia. So that the propaganda system is pro-Russia, while the military system is pro-Ukraine. So why does we think that China is maybe pro-Russia in the media and something was, but why didn't they have the very apparent behavior to help Russia? Because the resources about helping Russia is in control of the military. So, but the military is pro-Ukraine, so they don't want to help Russia. And the propaganda system is pro-Russia, so they still they tend to release news which are in favor of Russia. So the list is now there's no consensus inside China. So and this dispute will be will get more and more and will continue to the next year. Right now, one of the things I want to get involved is to boost about the pro-Ukrainian side in the China, because I find there are many there are many chances, but this kind of operation I'm keep doing, but I can't reveal any message because I'm the Taiwanese. Literally, I'm Taiwanese. In China, the definition of the 台独分子 means people who support Taiwanese independence. Is if you born in Taiwan, you are supposed to support the Taiwanese independence. So my identity is very sensitive. So I can only do some underground activity, but I can't reveal my activity in China very apparent or open. Yeah.
Cheng, but if I can put something else also for Ekner and to Anatoly, just to take a look to what you said before. To refer to Philip about Kissinger, there is an interesting, let's say, chat between Nixon and Kissinger about let's start some economical deal. We have to choose more with Russian and Chinese. And the history, I didn't know about it. It was like they were in New York and talking about it at the UN, and they said, let's go out in New York. Can you tell to me how many Russian laundry you can find in New York? 0. So it's like the Chinese approach to business was selected by the US government to start a deep relationship economically with Chinese. It's like a simple story, but it's very interesting about how the US mentality, let's say, during the 70s and 80s was like selective to the Chinese. Let's say to create, I'm not saying Japan number 2, but with some relationship that could be, let's say, interesting, like to make a relationship in economy. What I had to say about China and the relationship with the US and the West, we will have a speech with 2 Italian professors that are one is specialized in China and another one it's in Asia, but they are both in US now. And they told in a speech in Italian that was very interesting for me that the let's say behavior of Chinese with Europeans and West changed a lot after the crisis of 2008. Like before 2008, they thought that the West was, let's say, invincible in economy. I'm talking about, let's say, I don't know, before 2008, they said to us that it was possible to also contest the government in the bar, say whatever you want and whatever. But now, no. It's not, I mean, the people that are, let's say, in opposition or not pro-government had to choose to stay or to go, but not to talk publicly. For Anatoly and Ekner, let's take a fast look about what we can have about pipeline. What Ekner said about the pipeline, I agree completely, because the field is different. The field from Europe, it's different from the field that it's going to Power of Siberia too. So we can check that the project of Power of Siberia 2, it's not at all finished, and we were talking about finishing it if everything is going 2028. And at the actual situation, I don't know if the finance could, let's say, be enough to finish, except if it's paid completely by China. If it's paid by China, I think it's possible to make it. But if you see how much long is it, it's like Power of Siberia 2 project. It's very long. The Power of Siberia now, as Ekner said, it's from Chianda field. It's not from Yamal, from the north, from Siberia. And the other interesting thing that I put to Anatoly and Ekner, it's the situation of Turkmenistan. That for me it's very interesting because they're starting to make a lot of direct agreement with China without passing through Russian Federation. We can check that in this new Transasia gas pipeline, it's going through Turkmenistan, from Turkmenistan through Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan to China directly without passing to Russian Federation. And actually, Turkmenistan is the 5th state in the world for gas resources. Last thing, and then Anatoly and Ekner, if you can talk about this field. It's interesting for me about this international legislation problem about the situation of the Caspian Sea. I studied in a book that is called The Order and the Glory of Steve Levine, that the Russian point of view of the Caspian Sea is that it's a lake. If you talk to all the Russians that you know, they say to you that it's a lake, it's not a sea. And technically, the problem is that if it's a sea, you don't have to have the agreement of all the borders to pass and make the Trans-Caspian pipeline. That doesn't exist from Turkmenistan to Baku. With this, you are able to import to European Union gas directly from Turkmenistan and not through Russian Federation. So, your opinion about it, Anatoly, Ekner, up to you.
Okay.
Okay. And the problem is that about the pipeline in the Russia and China, as far as I know, I know that the natural gas which Russia sold to the China is via the LNG, it's via the sea line instead of the pipeline. I remember that the pipeline is not very it's not a major way for the importing. But I think that although the China is a really huge market, and that the central pipeline showed in this map will be completed in 5 years. This is true, and at that time the import of the natural gas will be much more than now. This is always true, but I want to quote one thing, the two things. You may not notice that there are two major countries who buy the Russia's natural gas in the Asia. The first one is called Japan. The second one is South Korea. Don't estimate the Japan and South Korea. Japan has 300 million population, and Korea has 15 million population, and both Japan and South Korea are the manufacturing country, and they need a lot of the energy. I don't know about whether you are being interested in South Korea or not, but there's a news that the U.S. want South Korea to lend the ammunition to Ukraine, but later the South Korea refused to do it. Why? Because they don't want to piss off Russia. The South Korea has the very huge contract between on the oil and natural gas. Now currently, I can say it is at least 30% of the South Korea's natural gas is from Russia, and this is a really huge amount. So although that indeed the relationship between the China and Russia, the two big dictatorship country, is very interesting. But when you talk about the pipeline, when you talk about Russian economy, do not forget these two countries, Japan and South Korea, because currently they are the main customer to Russia. And actually, the Russia's selling to the India is just going up. Currently, its major clients are Japan and South Korea. Okay.
Anatoly, if you can say something, and I will put the actual data of this week so we can talk about it.
Okay, yeah, sure. I mean, it's always important to bear in mind that natural gas is a sort of a modest percentage of a country's energy requirements. It's pretty fungible, can be replaced without much difficulty, as for that matter, Europe has shown. So some of the Z people were fantasizing about Europeans freezing over the last winter. And obviously, none of that happened. And in fact, spot prices for natural gas just like there was a brief spike, and then and then it just kept going down. And natural gas isn't actually a huge part of Russia's revenues, for that matter. It's mainly oil. Actually, if you look at the actual numbers, oil I think is something like 5 times more. So I think all of these sort of like speculations about this map analysis of where the pipelines go and so forth. I mean, it's probably not actually that sort of like important in the big picture. Just to address some of the previous points made about China, I'm not really sure where Cheng is getting the idea that China's economy is collapsing. I mean, I had to look. Growth is projected 5 to 6% of GDP this year, which is a slowdown. On the other hand, I mean, the slowdown could be expected because China is reaching the end of easy growth, catch-up style easy growth, like migrating people from the countryside to the cities and like building factories and housing. I mean, that sort of like investment-heavy growth has sort of like fulfilled most of its possible potential. So a slowdown is probably more or less inevitable. At this point. On the other hand, yes, I mean, Russia, I think, has been disappointed by sort of like the fact that China has sort of like been relatively lukewarm about supporting Russia in the Ukraine war. Is this a good idea? I mean, that's sort of open to question. On the one hand, if Russia sort of like ekes out a bad, like a draw, as seems to be stalemate or actually loses, then on the one hand, yes, if the Putin regime survives after that, Russia will become much more dependent on China, like assuming that it remains cut off from the West. And in the scenario in which Putin survives a lost war, I think that sort of can be banked upon. Which would presumably be good for China if Russia basically becomes a giant Myanmar. On the other hand, if Putin does not survive a lost war and there's some kind of color revolution, then things could go very badly for China in the sense that they would lose its sort of only more or less sort of serious ally. Well, I mean, they have North Korea, Myanmar, Pakistan to a less extent, but I mean, they're sort of like, not really very relevant. If they lose a strategic via that Russia represents, and that could actually become very bad for them, considering that they've also alienated India over the past 3 years, and so they end up basically surrounded. So it's pretty questionable whether the Chinese approach is actually optimal from a sort of strict sort of power maximization perspective.
Ekner, okay, but I am putting also some graph later because I had the analysis of the export of this week, so I can give you like the last data. So if you can say your position about.
You got it. Is it possible I can share my screen real quick?
Yeah, you can share it. You can.
I click sharing, but I don't know how much it's lagging right now. Don't show these tips again. Give me 1 second, and then we got it. Oh, where is it? Okay, there. Google Maps. It's a very simple one.
Okay. You are.
You guys can see it?
Yeah.
It's quite slow where I'm at. Damn, my whole screen is frozen. No, okay. First and foremost, I see that we have there's like 2 questions going on. So the first one I can bypass quickly because I don't know too much around Central Asia's fields, logistics, and everything. Yeah, my map is frozen. I can't show what I want to show right now, I think. Like I have no idea what I'm about to circle at the moment because everything's gone.
No, you are like You are like on Caucasus, and you are showing Kazakhstan.
Yeah, then it's not. Yeah, my map is. What I'm saying is on my screen is completely off. But okay, can you guys, from what I can see, I'm pretty sure I'm going to circle the wrong thing if I can't see. My screen is completely frozen. But what I was going to show, we'll just follow it from my eyes instead of me pointing with the marker, is that if you look, you guys can see where Moscow is from the very top, and you guys look down towards Georgia, and right
Yes.
before we get to Azerbaijan and Baku, right
Mhm.
before we get to Central Asia, that if you go down from Moscow to eastern Ukraine all the way down to the Caucasus, and it curves like a moon towards Georgia, that is something that the Russians have really put a hard emphasis on trying to control. There's a lot of lanes and there's a lot of pipes, and that's how they're able to expand their influence and infrastructure, because the infrastructure is already built in Georgia. Now, if you go to the right of it, which unfortunately I cannot circle it for you, but it's basically just northeast of Georgia, there's a pocket where there's nothing. There's no infrastructure, there's no civilization, it's just long roads, kind of like Route 66. It is empty, and it's the size of Utah, and there's no control or no way it's very hard for the Russians to expand. Now, what I'm trying to get with this is that the Russians have always wanted to have the eastern side and the southern side of Ukraine, also for the particular reason of engaging with their influence, or expanding their influence up to the Georgian region and to the Caucasus. Now, coming back to Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan is getting very powerful. You're going to see a lot of wars possibly turn out in this area due to the expansion between the Turkish and the Azerbaijanis, the lack between any real physical power, the restraint that Armenia has, and Georgia possibly having a third war in the last 20 to 30 years. And that region is going to change and shape a lot very soon. And if the Russians do not gain control of Eastern Europe to go down to the Georgian region, that we're going to see a lot of things happening, a lot of news going on between Georgia and the Caucasus. That's all I had to say on that. I don't know much about the Central Asian part. But now we get back into China, and I don't think I need the map. We all know where the Jin provinces to the northwest. Correct me if I'm saying it wrong. In history of China, they've always needed that particular area, even though that culturally, it is not Han Chinese. It has always been Uyghur Muslim, another Turkish or another Muslim tribe. And if we look back, I think the year was like 850, so 850 AD. The Chinese have also done another genocide at the time, where they have gotten rid of around 400 to 800,000 Muslims in that time. And this is something, and it's not to put a blame that only China does genocide. That's something we see throughout time in history, again, through certain parts. But in this area, very rural, northwest China, it was their time to have this Belt and Road Initiative, or the Great Silk Road, as we know it, to expand from China's Chinese market and their Chinese kingdom to the west of the Roman kingdom, and that's why they need that Xinjiang province. So we're seeing a lot of. So China has always wanted to have this part to influence and to project their power, so that they can continue their road of the Belt and Road Initiative to look for going to Central Asia, which is Uzbekistan to Tajikistan and Turkmenistan, and then goes beyond to the Caspian Sea and Georgia. If China does not have the Xinjiang region, the same way that I explained that Russia does not control Eastern Europe, the infrastructure and all of the infrastructure going into the Georgian and the Caucasus, you're going to see a lot of movement going on and a lot of conflicts of how to retain and who gets control, because they do not want those areas to be completely autonomized. That's all I have to say at that point, while I'm completely lagging. So I will stop right there while I fix my screen.
No, but it was okay. We can hear you fastly. So I wanted to show two things, two data, like to stay in other 15 minutes, 20 minutes to talk about it, and then we will close. So about like Russian fossil fuel export. So you can see like this is the situation from the beginning of 2022. You can see, as I said, that pipeline gas it's going mainly to zero. So you can see that it was like the peak point was in April 2022 when there was like this lack of alternatives. There was no LNG infrastructure. If we check to the last week, this is updated to July, we can see that the most part of the export of oil and gas, it's like crude, as I said, but we can check also other interesting things because the only two insurance that is operating for the fossil fuel out of Russia, it's mainly European G7 or Norwegian companies. This is another thing that it's interesting because if you are not insured, you cannot bring oil and gas through LNG or to ports. You can have also Vladivostok check, but if float, if your navy is not insured, you cannot go like in international water. Another interesting thing about the exporter. Okay. South Korea, Japan, interesting, but it's irrelevant in the top 5 importer of gas and oil. We can see India and China, it's over 70% of the export of Russia now. When we have Turkey, then you still have European Union for the states that I said to you in advance, Slovakia, Hungary, a little bit of Bulgaria. But the most part, you can see, as I said, pipeline gas to European Union is going to Hungary, Slovakia, and Bulgaria. For the rest, it's not. It's coming crude oil, but still by pipeline. And Turkey, I think, as Ekner said, let me check if it's returned back because it went out. Okay, so I agree completely in what you said, Ekner, about Caucasus. I have a map. I went there many times. I went in Armenia. I missed Georgia, but I went also in Sochi. I went in many regions there. And I think what you said about Azerbaijan, it's very interesting, but it must be connected to Turkey. I think everything it's let's say military equipment, whatever. It's like an underground war about who will dominate about also defense industries after this war. It will be, I don't know, India, where will buy weapons after? They are satisfied about the effectiveness of the Russian defense industries in Ukraine. I don't think so. So, who would be the alternative? European defense system, US, it's very expensive. Could be Turkey. It's an interesting alternative. Bayraktar, it's like a new defense industry. Turkey has a lot of interest in Central Asia. Philip can say something about it. He studied in Kyrgyzstan. I think all the Central Asia had like a long time of Turkish influence. And I'm very sorry for the situation of Armenia. But if we think, I have a lot of friends there. If we think about what was the response of Russian Federation in the CTO agreement, like the NATO Russian version, when there was like the Nagorno-Karabakh war in 2020, when Armenia asked the intervention of Russian Federation, nobody moved nothing because I don't know. So Philip, if you can say something about your experience in Central Asia, what is your impression about it?
Yes, certainly. So just for wider context, so I studied in Kyrgyzstan or the Kyrgyz Republic for about 4 years, and then have worked in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and I'm actually in the process of setting up some other things in that part of the world at the moment in sort of the startup land and innovation landscape. So look, in terms of the Turkish influence, so obviously linguistically, they're all Turkic languages with the exception of Tajikistan. There is this idea of the greater Turkestan region, and there's this sort of great nationalist dream that one day all of the Turkic nations will unite. It's super unlikely that will ever happen, but that remains. That it's still sort of an undercurrent there. There is this sort of camaraderie and brotherhood that's there, but really Turkey is the one with all sort of power, money, and influence, and that's kind of the real mantle of leadership. If you're looking at sort of just purely the Turkish prism, it lies with Turkey. So that would be sort of in a nutshell, but happy to delve a little bit deeper if you like, except to say that obviously Central Asia really is a world unto itself, and then on top of that you've got sort of the Soviet layer, the Russia layer, and now everything that's happening today in the Ukraine. I mean, there are parts of the north of Kazakhstan which are majority Russian, and you could sort of see a situation where if say Kazakhstan became a bit too friendly with the West, who knows? But I think generally that would be unlikely. But you can see some interesting parallels, and I think there was certainly some people in Central Asia a little nervous when they saw what happened in the Ukraine. But Anatoly, I think you'd have a very interesting perspective on that.
Yeah. Let's ask to Anatoly, but if I can
about specifically Kazakhstan, or what specifically?
Philip.
The
Russian influence, the I guess that Soviet influence.
Okay.
And, yeah.
I'm pretty skeptical about it. So as in pessimistic in the long term, because people for several reasons. First, pre-war trends. There was the shared Soviet generation of people who these boomers who ruled Russia were communicating with and finding a common language. Those people are steadily dying off. So even if new leaders remain authoritarian, like Tokayev in Kazakhstan, they're still steadily distancing themselves from Russia nonetheless. Secondly, people like winners, they don't like losers. So Russia isn't performing well in Ukraine. So that's making those sort of trends more evident. Thirdly, there's the demographic factor. And that's also very important because Russians and European settlers in general in Central Asia, they have fertility rates similar to Russia itself. So 1.5 children per woman. In Kazakhstan, it's 3 children per woman, total fertility rates. So the share of the population and coupled with emigration, the share of the Russian population in places like Kazakhstan is going down quite rapidly, and it's no longer actually significant in the other Central Asian countries at all. So yes, the north of Kazakhstan was predominantly ethnic Russian, like in 1990, when Kazakhstan as a whole was 40-45% Russian. But now there's 3 million out of 15-16 million in Kazakhstan who are Russian, so 20%. Even that sort of geographic, the dominance is getting diluted in the north. So I don't really see Russian influence having much of a much in the way of staying power in the long term in Central Asia.
Anatoly, if I can ask you something, because I was very interested in studying about the 80s of the Soviet Union, and also the project that had Yeltsin during the collapse of the Soviet Union to create, let's say, Soviet Union number 2, a new union, not the project of Gorbachev, but the new one, only with Slavic people. And let's say that could be the situation of now of a union with Belarus plus Ukraine, without Central Asia. And it was very interesting for me about what you said about the demographic, let's say, issue, because they were aware about this situation also, let's say 40 years ago, and they were afraid of the growing up of the population that were Muslim in the Central Asia. And inside, let's say, in the next 50 years of Soviet Union that was continuing from the 80s, not, let's say, before 1991, to have a population that was decreasing in the Slavic part and increasing in the Muslim part, probably was not easy to manage. And it was interesting for me also another thing about Central Asia, that the official imams or the controller of the religious part was like selected by the Communist Party. So it was like an official imam and an official real, let's say, religious control. And this thing was, let's say, with me a little bit, let's say, interesting that the history is repeating about Ukraine, like to try to rebuild this type of the Soviet Union number two that didn't, let's say, succeed in 1991 in Belarus. And still, if in geopolitics, it's interesting to, let's say, as Brzezinski said, without Ukraine, Russia is not an empire anymore. But for me, without money from Europe, economically, let's say in the next 10 years, will be very struggling for Russian Federation to remain at the level before 2022. Because we can talk around and around, but with plus 40% of expenses for the war and minus 60% of revenue from oil and gas, I don't found like where I can take the money for the normal functionment of a state. What Anatoly, what do you think about it?
Well, I mean, I think that any successful, I mean, the whole post-Soviet story, if you're speaking of sort of setting up a, as you call it, the Soviet Union too, but based around the East Slavic core, I mean, that was just basically a history of progressively lost opportunities, because, well, first of all, Russia failed to really develop a soft power component. It was just mainly based on deals between post-Soviet elites and gas subsidies, which are not really an inspiring cause to unite around for obvious reasons. Then there was also a process of steady ethnogenesis or nation building in places like Ukraine, less so, to a much less extent in Belarus, obviously, but especially in Ukraine. And a steady sort of distancing of the popular culture from the Russian culture, and there was Russia failed in 2014. So I mean, at the same time as it's sort of like the correct course of action in 2014 was to either just either not do anything or to take Eastern Ukraine right there and then, because that would have been easily accomplished in 2014. The Ukraine didn't have an army then. There wasn't sort of like 8 years of military buildup and sort of like nation building that took place after 2014. But that didn't happen, and Putin waited another 8 years and then sort of launched this very incompetent special military operation, which he never sort of like devoted sufficient like resources to a manpower to actually accomplish. Yeah, I mean, you could have done something about this, but now it's too late to do anything about it. And frankly, probably the least catastrophic outcome would be that that the conflict sort of freezes again for Russia. I mean, at the current front lines, and then sort of like ties to economic ties to Europe, since obviously China doesn't seem interested in any real partnership beyond buying cheap resources from Russia, for lack of Russia lacking any alternative markets of sufficient size.
Anatoly, let me put like further round, and then we will do the last round table and close it. Some two like info and provocation. First, it's like my first time in Armenia was in 2017, And after I was like in Caucasus last time 2021, like we started just before the war. I was also in Sochi, all around, blah blah blah. I tried to enter also in Abkhazia because I wanted to see, but unfortunately, also if it's not a real state, I had like a single entry in Russia, so I was not able to cross and return back, so that I didn't do it. But let's say what I see, it's that in Armenia, the new generation, first, nobody is speaking Russian, 0% or at least nothing. You can see that the last generation that is speaking Russian, it's like were born in 90s. So all
Interesting.
people, yeah, let's say it's very interesting. Armenia, you can check. I have a lot of friends that studied with me. Let's say born in 1990, 1991. Everybody speaking in Russian, but in the school now we're not teaching Russians. So second thing, it's something that you can reach about also the let's say trading between Azerbaijan and Armenia in official tables with Russia. They are speaking Russian only because they were born in the Soviet system. So I'm curious what will be with the next generation of leaders, where we will speak and in which language. But it's very important because how you think, it's very, let's say, selected in the way and the language that we use. Like French, it's different. German, it's very different. English, it's very different. So another thing that I wanted to push to you, I had like a chance to enter in contact with a friend that is Russian ethnicity, northern Kazakhstan, born in Kazakhstan, Kazakhstan citizenship, and choose to get Russian citizenship in 2021. Okay, I didn't know that it's forbidden from Kazakhstan to have dual citizenship with Russian. So you know, Philip. So so what happened? I didn't know that it was so strict. First, you can live in Kazakhstan speaking only Russian, no problem. But you want to have any state work only Kazakh language. So if you don't speak Kazakh, you cannot work in the state, let's say, career or whatever. Second, when this person re-entering Kazakhstan with a dual citizenship, because she didn't decline yet the Kazakh citizenship, she was, let's say, like of arrested at the airport and with the denial of re-enter in the country where she was born for 5 years. So for me, let's say, to have this type of relationship between two former Soviet Union states is a little bit strange, and this happened like this year, not like 20 years ago. Last provocation and last question for the panel. How do you see like the actual situation in Ukraine, especially because for me at this moment there is a lot of, my point of view is that there is a lot of underground, let's say pushing to make some, let's say, agreement between the parts. There is someone, let's say, not first line of diplomats, but second line of US diplomats that are very traveling a lot between parts. So what is your point of view about the war that is not going in any way?
I mean, in the previous appearances here and in sort of like Twitter posts which I've made, which I've been making since basically late last year, essentially. One of my predictions has been like from as early as this January, is that most likely I do not see a big chance of the front line shifting in any further cardinal directions. Because Russia isn't mobilizing, isn't doing a war economy, which is the sort of thing it would need to be doing to actually like have any offensive success. To the contrary, its sort of armor reserves are just continuing to be efficient. And Ukraine is getting weaponry from NATO and so forth. but it seems to me mostly in quantities that are sufficient to put pressure on the Russians, but not to actually crumple the front line in any sort of like radical way. So my default prediction remains that that so far as the war continues, that it's just going to be like the front lines are going to be staying where they are currently, and that it's the logical decision at this point, which has been sort of like the logical one since January, would be to sort of like freeze the conflict and open up peace negotiations. But this evidently isn't something that either the Kremlins or the Ukrainians, for that matter, are interested
Anatoly,
in at any
let
rate
me
right
ask
now.
you, but
Yeah.
because about this it's interesting. Your point of view, let's say a Russian point of view, because I already know.
It's not the Russian point of view. I don't
No,
speak
no, no,
for
no.
Russia or anything.
But
Yeah. Okay.
your point of view as Russian, let's say, about what could be one peace negotiation that could be satisfying, like the Russian elite.
Well, I mean, I suppose it depends on the ultimate outcome on the battlefield and what the West could sort of offer in terms of sanctions relief and so forth afterwards. But one sort of like default solution might be to agree to say Russia giving up the post 2022 territories, Kherson, Zaporozhye, in return for Ukraine either recognizing or at least agreeing to UN supervised referendums in Donbass and Crimea, which Russia is almost certain to win fairly even. So something along those lines, and perhaps some other further arrangements. As we know, the EU has frozen something like $300 billion in Russian foreign currency assets, and perhaps in return for Russia agreeing to pay for Donbass and Crimea, which the Ukrainians could frame as reparations domestically, if they want to. That could be the sort of agreement which could provide the path forwards for sanctions relief.
Anatoly, if I can synthesize like your thought, and then I will pass to others. It's like a return back to the situation let's say, invasion. Let's say with the part of Donbass that was already LNR, DNR before February 2022. And also Crimea, let's say, the part of Russian Federation with an agreement between the parts, and the funds that were frozen used to reconstruction of Ukraine. This is like the simplest.
Russia could frame it as payment for Ukraine recognizing Donbass and Crimea as part of Russia, and Ukraine could domestically frame it as Russian reparations for the war, like so far as PR goes. So I mean that's sort of like one potential solution, which would not make anybody happy. But doesn't seem to be like an unfair settlement in light of Donbass and Crimea genuinely being sort of pro-Russian territories, even according to polls and elections before the war. And also at this point, it's probably no longer realistic to expect that Ukraine not to join NATO. So I mean that train has sort of left the station.
And Ekner, if you can say like the last thing, like like your point of view about like let's say war in Ukraine and that situation. When we pass Chang and Philip and we close.
First, let me get on the last part where he said about where it's non-realistic for Ukraine to join NATO. I don't see that happening either, especially not in the short term. Everyone talking about it. I think even the Washington stated that it's not going to happen until the war is over. Now, coming to my opinion about the war and everything, it's not even going to make my own Telegram channel happy. I think I have around a good 50% pro-Ukrainian. I would say I have a good 20 to 30% pro-Russian, and then the rest would be along the middle lines, the gray zone. I think it has I think there's no more real way that the Ukrainians can advance. The counteroffensive has started. It's been there for 1 month now. It started along the 5th or the 6th of last month. It's been going on. They have not been able to breach the first line of defense, but they have heart. We're not going to get into the hearts to pull the heartstrings of people. They don't want to stop. And the Russians are more willing to come to the table right now to negotiate than the Ukrainians are. This is a warfare of economics now. Who's willing to cut the supply? Because if Russia cuts the supply and says they don't want to be there anymore, the war stops. If the United States says that they're no longer going to supply to the Ukraine, the war stops. It could be over in a day. But no side wants to do that just yet. How much more can the Ukrainians gain? Any battle that the Ukrainians do that is not in the favor of a 3-to-1 ratio, kill death ratio, where they do not kill more than 3-to-1 death, is a loss for Ukraine. And a ratio of a 3-to-1, they don't have the manpower to supply, okay, to continue the way that the Russians can. They need to pull miracle maneuvers, and I think they have done some very interesting miracle maneuvers when they were able to capture large parts of the Kharkiv region and Izum and Kharkiv. They were able to finally drive them out of Kherson. But who's not to say that they cannot do another miracle? Unfortunately, and this is I would say, a very weather thing, they wanted to do their other counteroffensive as quick as possible. Thus, winter came. It became very wet. It gave the Russians a lot of time to hold the lines and to continue to mine and to keep making trenches. And now look how heavily fortified they are on the southern front in the Zaporizhia region. They cannot budge. It is very difficult. And if they do, it's going to take a long, long time. They cannot just blitzkrieg through it. They will lose half their men. They don't have that kind of manpower for it. In the east, though, they've been showing some more interesting movements. They've been more successful along the flanks of Bakhmut again. But Bakhmut is another thing. That's a strong point, and it's showing the relevance for both sides how important Bakhmut is. Do not listen to the Western media or to even the Eastern media that Bakhmut is just a stepping stone. It is very important fortification for both sides to control. But that might be another 5 months or a year until if they're even able to gain control of Bakhmut again. But until then, we're left with it's going to be very slow incremental gains unless if Ukraine can pull a miracle. And for that reason, I would even say that the negotiating line should be around now. Where the line is satisfied, the Russians may be able to take the rest of the Donbass or the Donetsk region, or the Ukrainians could take Bakhmut again and maybe a bit of the south. But they will never be able to march into Crimea. Let me knock on wood real quick before my own audience gets mad at me for listening to this recording. But even getting to Crimea is another hard port, and the Russians are very devoted to making sure that they do not lose the south, their source of food and resources, and the east, their sources of resources. I'll end right there.
Okay, thank you, Ekner. I agree with you, but I don't know. I think that we don't know everything about the situation because in the speech that I had, and everybody can see with Elia Ponomarev, that is like Anatoly know him, is like the guys that was behind Svoboda Russia in the Belgorod region, whatever. We talk a lot about it. I don't know, like Ukrainians.
Exactly, it's the same with me. It's an I don't know because the situation keeps unfolding. Something brand new keeps happening. Like all of a sudden, this coup that just happened. Who put that? That was not in my bingo list.
Okay, let's say that I asked to him, but I'm not saying nothing that I cannot say. Let's say I asked to him. I don't want to know the test because I don't know. I know that you will not say to me, but tell me what is like your idea or whatever. Because the main problem is, if you talk to 100 Ukrainians, 100 Ukrainians will say to you that they will not want Russian in Crimea, Zaporizhia, Kherson, Donbass. 100%. They're not able and ready to negotiate. But I agree with you. If the West will say we want that you negotiate, in one day the war is ended because without us the war is finished. Either like for the Russian, it's the same. But the main point is that I don't really have the point of what is happening behind negotiation, diplomacy, and what is on the table. Especially because when I was talking with these people, let's say Ukrainians or whatever, I don't know, they are so self-confident in something that I don't understand. But you got what I'm saying? That I'm not able to explain what will happen because everything to up. Let's say that also the others that speak that speak in my roundtable, military summary, New World Report, anything. Let's say also Web Union. Every map analyst have like his point of view. If we return back 1 year, I think that no one prediction were true of what happened the last year.
No one has been able to predict anything that has happened so far. Just a few
No.
things
But
about
what
to
I'm
start.
saying, at the first month we were talking about, and it was like, I don't know, it will be like this, that, and that. So and it was so precise that didn't happen what was expecting. And the battleground now, it's very, let's say, different from the beginning, and there is a lot thing to lose, both sides. But I think at this moment more for Russians, because Ukraine is completely dependent from the West. As a state, it's said Anatol, it's more a state than a country, because at the moment and after the war, it will be completely dependent from, let's say, a new Marshall Plan for Ukraine. But it depends for me at this point, and I will pass to Philip and Cheng to finish. At this point, if Russians were able to cut off the sea at the beginning and arrive to Odessa, I think the war was already finished.
They did try to landlock Ukraine at some point. That was a part of their script as well, but they have not been able to get to Odessa. That is correct.
Yeah, but if they were able to landlock, I think Ukraine without sea, it's finished. It's like Hungary.
I want to say one last thing, and then I do want to pass it on because I see Philip about to. He's rolling in his chair right now. He's ready. I can hear it. I can feel it. The last thing I was going to say was like what we said, from the war from the very beginning to this point, it's hit multiple phases. Some people count 2, some people count 3-point phases of the war. Some people say 3, 4, 5. It is the objective has changed, but very unique. And I'm going to give an applaud for like both sides, kind of unbiased. The Russians have realized that they don't need to control all of Ukraine. They realize they don't need to control Kiev to control what truly matters to them. So they switched and they came out of Kiev and rolled out to the east and the south. Then phase 2 came. That didn't work either, where they tried to landlock. But now we're seeing that the Russians are also willing to also calibrate. They're also willing to learn on the battlefield, and they will get ahead. The same with the Ukrainians. They're not over. So every time their mentality, they're starting to switch people from the top of the military of the command, and they're starting to roll them over. And it's happening every second, where you see all of a sudden a new phase happens. And from this point, this is what I think right now is that they should stop. But then there's going to be a next point, and not let alone as we're speaking right now, the NATO summit is going on. I can see ping notifications going on with what Biden, what Schultz is saying. And now the one last thing I can say is that what I see, and who knows what they're going to say tomorrow and the next day until it's over, I think it finishes on the 12th, is now that you have Rheinmetall about to go into an industrial set. The amounts of artillery that the United States used to do, because they never were an artillery nation. Artillery was always a Russian thing, but we've always built it on a standard level. Now we're about to go industrial level. I know I just had to put an exclamation point there, but that point means that we get to roll out even more than what we were used to. And that's what this whole NATO summit is about. I'll end my case right there. Somebody else take the wheel.
Philip, you're last and Cheng, but Ekner, I give you one info that maybe outside Europe is not so popular or so news. Let's say there is an approach about the internal defense in Europe that was very interesting about 3 countries. Sweden, now completely aligned to NATO, and other 2, Swiss and Austria, completely neutral. Last week, for the first time from 1945, Switzerland and Austria agreed to make an agreement with a common air defense against Russian ballistic missiles with other European countries. About money, I think that Swiss it's interesting case. I think if you get the point. So, and I think that oligarchs now in Russia are very concerned about Prigozhin, not about Wagner, but because Prigozhin it's like controlling some diamonds and gold fields in Africa, and if you cannot use rubles, I think some other commodities could be interesting. And if your money in Swiss is frozen, also. So, Philip, if you can put your point about it.
Yeah, look, I'll make it short and sweet. So I think for me, the greatest challenge and the real disappointment for me is that I don't see any big strategic thinking happening on the part of the West. I see there's a lot of hawks, particularly in the United States, but also, unfortunately, Australia, that sort of have this bleed Russia dry sort of mentality. But they don't think a couple of steps ahead and think, what, if Russia were to lose, is that actually a good thing? Is a destabilized Russia good for the West? I personally don't think it is. I really don't. I think Russia keeps a lot of really nasty actors at bay, and I think that's useful for everybody. So I don't see the West planning 2 and 3 steps ahead. I think everybody hopes for peace, and I think what's happening now is a lot of emotionally driven decisions, and I'm seeing a lot of foreign policy by social media and not a lot of rational policy that's driven by just really rational outcomes. And I feel like that divergence between what we're seeing on social media and like I'm seeing fairly senior people saying, oh, we want to have our tanks on Red Square, and I'm thinking that's just moronic. You want your German-made Tiger tanks on the Red Square? Are you insane? Like, to even say that is just so moronic that it blows my mind, and it's not in anybody's best interest to say something like that. But you know what? It'll get you a few more followers, a few more likes. So I guess that's one of the concerns I have. But I hope that peace really becomes the focus. And as Agner was saying, the summit's happening right now, and I too am getting lots of pings. So it'll be fascinating to see how it all pans out.
Chang, if you want to make a fast close and then we say hi to everybody.
Oh yes, but for me, I would say I want the peace, but I want the peace for good, because that's if we set a bad peace, that the Ukrainians see the territory. There's no guarantee that Russia won't invade Ukraine in next 10 or 20 years. There's no security guarantees in Ukraine, so. I don't think that's because that now the war is is done. Now the war line, of course, the front line is done, and I think Agner has speak very explicitly. He speak very explicitly what NATO episode of show I was thinking now, because currently I see there are many newspapers are describing about the NATO dissatisfied about the Ukraine's performance on the battlefield. I think the counterattack is failed, and the president of the Czech Republic said that Ukraine has only one chance for a counterattack. So, but if they don't be successful, then the West will turn the point. They will turn their attitude and force Ukraine to negotiate a little issue. But I want to say that. This kind of war is like the Russia want to totally conquer Ukraine, but it may not be. Russia can't conquer one, but maybe he can divide this work into 5 stages. Stage 1, clear the 18% of territory. Stage 2, clear the 10% of territory. Stage 3, clear the 15% of territory. This could happen. So, but for me, I want peace, but I want peace for good. But for currently, as you said, the negotiation of the peace is this a good treaty? Or it is a bad treaty? It will make Ukraine more vulnerable than before, then make Russia more easy to invade again. This is what I'm thinking.
Okay, perfect, Chang. Thanks to Philip, Chang, Ekner, Anatoly. I will give you the last thing, like to close. I'm just ready to announce, I think, in the next month about this School of Geopolitics that we are organizing from the last year. The main idea that I have from the beginning is that like we have to start to think about what will happen. Let's say the last 2+ 2 years, because all the war that 4 disaster years before COVID, now war. I think that it will be a time for reconciliation also between people, and talking with a lot of friends both sides. I think with the actual condition, it will take minimum 10 years, 15 years, 20 years to, let's say, start to reconcile the position, especially for the people that have like people or relatives in war or whatever. But I think that from the diplomacy and from the people that is involved, it's time to start and think how to solve the problems after, because as Cheng said, I think everybody wants peace, and it's easier to organize a world without this type of conflicts, and we will have a choice to prevent them, because it's easier to live in peace and in prosperity, and it's something that we need to study, how to know each other. And for me, like a war between Ukraine and Russia, it's something, let's say, unbelievable, because the two populations are so next to. So it's like between Italy and Spain, for example, or I don't know. It's stupid. All the war is stupid, but this especially, it's more stupid than the others, because it's insane. So I'm hoping that everything will, let's say, solve in a better way soon. Thanks to Cheng, Philip, Ekner, and Anatoly. I will post like the video in 2 seconds for everybody, and all to the speakers. I will send you the registration you can use in your channels. For all the people that was online in live or later, if you have any question for the speaker, just post it in the comments, and go to every channel of them and subscribe. For them history, actually, like he has new channels, but he have like a very good Telegram channel with over 18,000 subscribers, so it's very updated. I suggest you. Also, TikTok channel was 19, sorry, not updated. I didn't want to be, but TikTok was very nice, so I hope that it will start. And Anatoly has a lot of channel pages, but you find in the description. Cheng has a Twitter and YouTube also. Philip, me and Philip only LinkedIn, so
just LinkedIn. We're boring. So traditional.
So, thank you so much to be with us, and I will update you soon about new speeches and new roundtable. So, guys, stay 1 second, and thank you to the people. See you soon.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, guys, and it was